Donald Trump wants Hamas to give up its weapons.
If they don't disarm, we will disarm them. They know I'm not playing games.
Keir Starmer says disarming is essential for peace.
We, the United Kingdom in particular, I think, can play a part in decommissioning.
But Hamas has previously strongly opposed calls to disarm. So can it actually be done, and what might that process look like?
It could be a really difficult and really long and challenging operation.
So, first of all, how much weaponry does Hamas still have, and will they be willing to hand it over? Well, the group's rocket stockpiles are reportedly nearly empty, but experts say Hamas still has enough light weaponry to pose a threat to Israel. That includes AK-47s, handguns, improvised explosives and rocket-propelled grenades. But how do you convince a group that has been fighting its biggest enemy for the past 2 years to just hand over its arms? When the first phase of the ceasefire was agreed, Hamas didn't publicly commit to disarming. Hamish de Bretton-Gordon is a former British Army colonel who played a key role in decommissioning chemical weapons in Iraq. He told us in these situations, money talks.
So in my experience, certainly in northern Iraq, what worked very well is actually by offering money. And I caveat that by saying that it would appear that most of the Gazans, most of the Palestinians actually no longer support Hamas. So they would either, I expect, as people did in northern Iraq, accept money to hand over weapons or dob in those who still have weapons. And it might sound a bit of a cynical way of doing it, but probably it is the safest way and actually probably in the long run the cheapest way of doing it. And these sort of starving people in Gaza who've suffered so much, actually to have a bit of money, which they're not going to spend on weapons, they're going to spend on food and getting their lives back together, in my experience and opinion, is probably the most practical and pragmatic way to rid Hamas of its weapons.
So, say the militant group is willing to hand over its weapons, who do they give them to, and what do you actually do with them? Well, Trump wants to install an international stabilisation force in Gaza as part of the peace plan, made up of Middle Eastern and Western soldiers. That is who would oversee the transition of power in Gaza, and that group are most likely to be given the job of collecting Hamas's weapons. Once handed over, they would be involved in what's known as decommissioning them. Here's where the UK could play a part, but more on that in a moment. Decommissioning essentially means the weapons and ammunition are changed so they can't be used ever again. This could be by altering or removing key parts or by destroying them completely. One
would hope that the stabilisation force then deal with them and destroy these weapons so they can't be used again. Because certainly, certainly my experience in Iraq and Afghanistan, you might remove weapons and unless you make absolutely certain they are put beyond use, they can be seen again. And certainly in Afghanistan, we saw that quite often, where weapons would be taken off, supposedly dealt with, and then we'd see the Taliban with them again. So it is very important, I think, that these weapons are, when we say decommissioned, we basically mean destroyed. And that's not a complex or difficult task. It just has to be done. But we are talking about thousands and thousands of weapons, no doubt, that will need to be destroyed. So we need a system, a comprehensive system, to be able to do that, and one that doesn't allow any leakage or seepage.
So, when and where have groups been successfully disarmed before? Well, Northern Ireland could be an example to follow, meaning the UK could play a key role.
We, the United Kingdom in particular, I think, can play a part in monitoring the ceasefire, but also decommissioning the capability of Hamas and their weaponry, drawing on our experience in Northern Ireland.
For more than 3 decades, the IRA fought an insurgency against British rule in Northern Ireland. In 1998, the Good Friday Agreement brought that violence largely to an end. The IRA were initially reluctant to disarm and accused the British of not following through on some parts of the peace deal. But eventually, a method of destroying the weapons was agreed, supervised by an independent commission. And 7 years after the Good Friday Agreement in 2005, the IRA's last remaining weapons were put beyond use. Security experts estimated as many as 1,000 rifles, 2 tons of plastic explosives, 7 surface-to-air missiles, and 20 to 30 heavy machine guns were decommissioned in that process.
We have now reported to the British and Irish governments that we have observed and verified events to put beyond use very large quantities of arms, which we believe include all the arms in the IRA's possession.
Jonathan Powell was a key figure behind the Good Friday Agreement. He's again at the centre of things here as Sir Keir Starmer's National Security Advisor. He has been praised by the White House for his contributions so far to the Gaza peace process. And the Prime Minister at the time of the Northern Ireland peace process was Tony Blair. Trump has said the former Labour leader could co-chair his Board of Peace and help oversee the reconstruction of Gaza. So what are the risks and potential pitfalls? The ceasefire deal was a big breakthrough, but in practice, peace is fragile and paranoia remains. For it to hold, Hamas will need assurance that Israel will keep up its side of the deal by withdrawing troops and allowing aid into Gaza unrestricted. And Israel will need assurance that it can withdraw its troops without fear of Hamas rebuilding its military capabilities. There have already been reports of public executions in Gaza since the ceasefire. Hamas says it has killed members of armed groups in an attempt to restore law and order after Israel's withdrawal. In 2 years of war, with Hamas focused on fighting Israel, armed gangs and powerful local families filled a power vacuum in Gaza. Some may question whether Hamas will want to give up their weapons if they feel threatened by these rival groups. President Trump said he didn't mind Hamas's efforts to restore order, but eventually he wants them all to hand over their guns. As part of his peace plan, Hamas fighters who agree to decommission their weapons will be given amnesty, and he had this warning to those who refuse to lay down their arms.
We have told them we want to disarm, and they will disarm. And if they don't disarm, we will disarm them. And it'll happen quickly and perhaps violently. But they will disarm. Do you understand me?
Yes.
Hamas has governed Gaza for almost 2 decades, and its weapons have been an instrumental part of the group's survival. At the moment, it's hard to imagine a world in which it agrees to hand over a source of that power, but that is what Donald Trump has said Hamas will have to do as part of this deal and for peace to last.